just general deterioration of age, but just that desire, the focus, the determination, the need to keep doing it. And so that's the imponderable question with Clark. Was he a year away from retirement, or was he quite happy just to keep going, and maybe wing cars come along and you think, oh, this is a fantastic challenge, I'm liking all this, and does he just keep going?
Yeah. And I don't think we should also lose sight of the fact about the way that Jim Clark went about motor racing and won. You know, he was a true sportsman. You never read anything about him having an edge to him in that sense. He was, honest. He was a stylist. I mean, you think about him in Lotus Cortinas, and I sort of said at the beginning about his straight arm style in the single seater. He was beautiful to watch as a performer. And I think that counts for something.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to add honest to that, because when I was doing some of the research, one of the races I had to look at, which is probably his most famous race, arguably, 1967 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, puncture early on, drops a lap behind, fights back, gets the lead at the end, has a fuel pickup problem and finishes third. And that was heralded as this amazing drive. Even now, if you go on forums and things, it gets suggested as one of, if not the greatest Grand Prix drivers of all time. And he was quite dismissive about that, according to Cronbach. And I find that quite interesting. And I kind of remember seeing footage of that on one of the sort of historic F1 things as a kid, and seeing how fast the Lotus blew past Jack Brabham's Brabham for the lead, and thought that looks like almost a different category. And that's pretty much what Clark said, was that it was a track that wasn't really a driver's track, and I had the fastest car, so it wasn't anything like as good as 62 Nürburgring, which is what he thought was his greatest race, which I agreed with when I'd finished my research. But the other thing I did check on that was this catching up a lap, comparing it to Graham Hill in the lead of the race. Once he'd caught the pack and the two of them had broken away, Clark took 2 seconds, I think, out of Hill over a 30-lap stint, which is basically very small, whereas some of his other races, in the wet in particular, he'd be seconds of that faster. So I think he was very honest in saying, well, this was a good drive, I really enjoyed this one, and that one wasn't. And I think honesty is always a good way for drivers to assess their own abilities and move forward.
The way my mind works, I always end up comparing sport and motor racing to music, and he was the same era, and for me, he was the Beatles. And for me, that's good enough. He knew he was a great performer, but it was also the way he went about it that people loved him for as well. And that's the analogy I always bring myself back to.
Yeah,
that's a very, very good way to look at it. I think the sad thing is that it's not possible to watch these drivers in action. When covering Formula 1, I spend a lot of time watching trackside, and you can see how certain drivers perform. And I think the style that Jim Clark had, that ability, to quite early rotation of the car, keep the minimum speed up, but without sort of feeling like he was forcing the issue, just letting the car do the work, is just the kind of driver I always like watching. So I suspect if I was 50 years ago watching trackside, I'd be thinking I'd see it perhaps in a way that you almost can't now. You can read about it, but you can't really get a feel for that delicacy of touch.
You could probably see the difference between the average and the greats much clearer then.
No question, yeah.
Yeah. So. There's a great little story, so just remind you, there's a great story in his book where he talks about, because obviously he helped develop the Cortina, which I think he found quite a hoot actually. And I can't remember where it is. It might have been Snetterton, and at that stage they had tyre markers on the apex of corners, and he realised during the course of this run that it was picking the inside wheel up. So he just gradually got closer and closer until he could time it so that he was essentially cutting the track by having the wheel in the air over the tyre marker as the apex. And so he'd spotted that weird idiosyncrasy. That must have been pretty impressive to watch as well, and gradually getting more and more of the car over this tyre with the hop of the front wheel.
But also that ability to be on that limit. That's a difference in those days that you'll see with the drivers, that the best drivers are able to operate closer to the limit consistently without sort of going off and being injured or killed all the time. The way Clark was driving had nothing to do with what happened to him in 1968. Then that was outside of his control. But now drivers can sit on that limit, and if it goes wrong, well, they'll be in the barrier and fine. But the difference you could see, to be able to live on that fine edge that all the great drivers are able to do is a remarkable achievement, I guess you could say. Well, before we finish, Kev, you should probably quickly run through your Jim Clark's greatest drive list, because you did put a lot of work into that, and it is interesting to pick out those. Now, I'd ask you not to go for your honourable mentions that I always deride you for adding, because I think if you've got to go for a top 10, you go for a top 10.
Yeah, I've had some interesting I've had some interesting conversations about that, because my copy for this particular feature was way too long, to the point where even the web guy said, no, come on. So honourable mentions are probably going to have to be discarded from my future list. So yeah, I'll just stick to the 10. So 10th was the 61 South African Grand Prix that I mentioned earlier, defeating Moss after spinning off. 68 Australian Grand Prix, under pressure from Eamon the whole time. The 63 French Grand Prix, where he nursed the car to win by over a minute despite two broken valve springs. 63 Aintree 200, which we didn't talk about, but he took over teammate Trevor Taylor's car and obliterated his own lap record from the year before's British Grand Prix. I think he came through to third, but he took about a minute out of Graham Hill during the course of the comeback. 65 British Grand Prix, where he drove on the ignition switch to keep the car going. 65 Indy 500, we haven't actually talked about that, a race he described as perfect. It was very difficult to place that race, because it all went to plan. He didn't even he said he didn't really have to fight adversity. It was just the best driver in the best car having the scheduled run. They even did one less pit stop than most of the others. They'd completely annihilated the field. 67 Italian Grand Prix we talked about. 66 Dutch Grand Prix fighting the bigger engine Brabhams. 63 Belgian Grand Prix, which was appalling conditions, and he won by nearly 5 minutes. And then the 62 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, which he himself picked out as his greatest drive, where he forgot to turn the fuel pumps on the line, and then charged back to fourth. Did actually have the leading three in sight almost. It was a Hill Surtees Gurney fight for the lead. One of the underrated Grand Prix of all time, that one. And then had a big moment, decided that was probably enough. So that's the 10.
Now, there is one famous race that's not in there.
We did get one letter. I got far less stick for this, which I'm not sure whether that's good or bad than I was expecting. But the one comment was that they'd put the 62 Nürburgring 1,000 kilometres in, where it ended up in the diminutive Lotus, and came through at the end of the first lap. Do you remember, Damo, how much it was? Was it 25 seconds or something ridiculous?
Like that, yeah. And
he just kept pulling away until he was overcome by exhaust fumes and crashed. But I kind of took that to be a flagging up of the future of sports car design rather than Clark's. It was a lightweight load. That was where sports car racing was going up against all these old sort of dinosaurs. So I put that in the aforementioned and criticised honourable mentions list. It didn't make my 10.
Anything missing there for you, Damien?
Pretty good list. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Good.
That's good.
Yeah, well done.
I'm pleased about that. I've been pretty annoyed if there's a race I'd missed.
I'm sure some listeners will.
Someone will come up with something.
We'll get in touch and explain why you're wrong.
I've got a very much longer list, so yeah, drop me an email, and if it's not on there, then get some sort of prize. I don't know what the prize would be.
He really has got a longer list with a lot of information in it, and he'll probably be sat here talking to himself long after the mics have been turned off.
Oh, is that an option?
Yeah, you can sit in the darkened room and.
Why does it have to be dark? I want to be able to read my notes.
Well, that's a good point. But it's automatic lights in here. If you don't move long enough, the lights go out.
Yeah, that's true.
So you'll have to gesticulate your arms around and generally perform to nobody. Well, that's a suitably random point to finish on. I'm not really sure what we've proved in this, but it is always fascinating to delve into the careers of these drivers. You know, the debate will go on forever as to who's the greatest. The one thing you can say about Jim Clark is unquestionably he merits a place in that debate, and he's one of the best half dozen Grand Prix drivers of all time. And I suspect where you put him within that is probably down to personal taste. Well, thanks very much to Kevin Turner and Damien Smith for their insight into Jim Clark. I urge everyone to check out Autosport.com for all the latest news and coverage of slightly more modern goings on in motorsport. But we do occasionally in our Autosport Plus subscriber area have some retro features, and in fact the Jim Clark's greatest races feature ran earlier this year to coincide with the anniversary of the loss of Jim Clark. So there's something there for everyone. Also check out Autosport magazine, out every Thursday, and sister titles F1 Racing and Motorsport.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another Autosport podcast. Music is 6am by Trilo, written by Marcus Simmons. See soundcloud.com/Trilo Music.
Right now, join T-Mobile and get an unlimited family plan with Netflix included, so you can watch in more places than ever before on your phone, tablet, or TV. Plus, buy one Samsung Galaxy S9 and get one free with 24 monthly bill credits, so you and your family can binge your Netflix favorites on your new phones. Call 1-800-T-Mobile or visit a store today.
Unlimited data on their network. Video streams at 480p. Small fraction of customers using over 50 gigs per month may have reduced speeds. If you cancel, balance is due. Well qualified customers, full price, $720 plus tax. Finance agreements required. Netflix for 2 screens. Terms apply.